Sadly, as I said off the top, this has really become a global sort of issue that everyone is talking about, including here in Canada. What are you seeing on that front?
Very much so. In fact, as you mentioned, here in Canada today, in Toronto, there were protests as well. Large crowds gathered on the street, blocking traffic as well. People protesting racism, both against the African Canadian community, the African American community in the United States, but also anti-Indigenous racism they were protesting. We saw smaller crowds gather in Montreal and in Halifax as well. That this also touched people across the pond. In Europe, for example, in Berlin, people gathered there outside the U.S. Embassy, angry about what they see and saw happen in the United States. People in London, in Britain as well, protested, holding up signs, protesting together, chanting, calling for change that they say they see as necessary as well. Have a listen.
Everything needs to change, the whole thing. And we're starting protests, things like these. These are the baby steps in order to have big change. Because we're
tired of just having conversations on Instagram, posting stuff on stories. Exactly. It's not doing anything. It's not helping no one. We've been having these conversations since we were 11 years old.
Yeah, nothing's
We're
changed.
now 18.
So, Natasha, that is just some of the reaction we are seeing, not just here in Canada, across the states, across the United States as well, but also in Europe.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. Now, in Toronto, thousands of people have gathered in the streets demanding answers in the death of 29-year-old Regis Korchinski-Paquette. She fell from her balcony while the police were present, and her family believes the police might have played a role in her death. The Ontario Special Investigations Unit is looking into that incident. Selina Caesar-Chavannes is a former member of Parliament who was at the protest, and she joins us now. Selina, really good to speak with you. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you for having me today.
So when you were at the protest, Selina, give us a sense of what you saw. What were people saying? What was the mood and the atmosphere like?
Well, I think I want to start off by saying that I'm really glad that CBC is focusing on this particular issue. I knew that over the last couple of days, there's been a few people on social media calling for CBC News to focus more on Canadian content. I know Sandy Hudson has and Kika Ojo. And the mood there today was one of solidarity. It was one of frustration. It was one of ensuring that we were there for each other. We've been isolated for a very long time with COVID and dealing with a lot of the pressures of having a disproportionately negative impact of the disease, but also having, again, seeing racism continue to play a role in the dehumanization and destruction of Black lives.
So tell me about you specifically, because you were a public official, and even though you're no longer a member of Parliament, you still have a very prominent public voice. What drove you to be out there? What made you say, okay, I'm going to leave my home, get out in the middle of this big crowd because I need to express something? What was that thing you needed to express?
Well, I think, you know what, we're at a point where this disease, COVID, is going to kill us, or silence is going to kill us. And at this point, we are frustrated as a community. As a community, we've seen the violence. We've seen what happens when we're walking down the road, when we're casually minding our business. And that's not just in the United States, that's here in Canada as well. And today we were walking in solidarity with a Black Indigenous woman who had an interaction, had a mental health issue from what we understand, called police for help, and ended up on the ground of her apartment. We're walking in solidarity with her.
You know, it sounds to me that so much of this is, of course, about Regis, that 29-year-old young woman who lost her life, and there is going to be an investigation. But it really seems to me, because this has become a global conversation that's taking place, it's about a much larger thing, and you've alluded to it in terms of anti-Black racism. We've been talking about it for years. Do you feel there's been any progress?
I don't think we have to look much further than what we're seeing in Peel Region in our school system. We don't need American headlines to show Canadians what anti-Blackness looks like and how it permeates throughout our society. We didn't need the death of Mrs. Korchinski-Paquette to understand how racism plays itself out. We could see it in our school system. If anybody's paying attention to what's happening in Peel Region, we could see that happening in our school system, in the overpopulation of our prison system due to over surveillance with our Black and Indigenous peoples. Our health outcomes, when we talk about COVID-19 disproportionately impacting the Black community and our healthcare workers, we know that it exists. And so it's a much broader and it's a much larger issue than what we're currently seeing.
So then for you, because you were in the business of public solutions as well, so what do you think has to be the solution? How do things get better?
I think, number one, we need to start listening to individuals who have been doing this for a long time. And I know that as I said earlier, Sandy Hudson was supposed to be on CBC on The Current, and she talked about defunding police. And whether we want to agree with that or not, we have to really examine how much of our budget goes into the things that we really want to prioritize. If we really want to prioritize mental health services for communities that need it the most, then that budget should be salient. That budget should be prioritized. We should be prioritizing programs that actually look after and take care of youth. We need to be looking at programs that really help and empower communities and not further allow them to be over surveillance or further stigmatized.
Now, Selena, you know that people are going to hear you saying these things, or even the comments that were made by Selena, who's an activist. And for those who aren't familiar, she has a stream on Twitter where she's laid out some of her ideas about dealing with anti-Black racism. You know that people are going to hear those suggestions and say, oh, these guys are extremists. These are extreme perspectives. They're not looking for solutions. They're looking to tear down the system the way it is now. How do you respond to that? Because then they say, well, we don't want to go to an extreme. We want to work somewhere in the middle that feels safe for most people.
We're not safe. So are we supposed to make everybody else feel safe at whose expense? At our expense, at our community's expense? Because we don't want to listen, because we don't want to put all options on the table? Why can't we put the extreme options on the table as well? Why can't we listen to those realities, those people who have been listening? Now all of a sudden everybody's woke about Black lives. Well, these women have been doing this for a very long time. And so why can't we listen to some of these ideas? Why can't we take some of those budgets and put them into prioritizing mental health and justice for our people? Why is that not an option?
Okay, we'll keep the conversation going. Selena, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Selena Caesar Chavannes joining us from Toronto.